yesterday, I thought somebody would be looking this upside down at least or something, trying to figure out what's going on. All right, I'm going to start the quiz. I think it's short, so short time. What should be in the blank? 30 seconds. We'll see who wants to play the odds here. 1 second. All right, so is someone who picked other actually have a good idea what should be in there? What do you think?
I think it's the amount of loops in the numbers.
Ah, yeah, very good. So this is, you can look at the numbers not as values, but as little topological entities and count up how many closed loops there are. So in a 2, there are no closed loops. In a 4, there's a closed loop for the 4 and one for the 0, so that's 2 of them. For the 8, there's 2 little closed loops, so there's 2, 935, and then in 98, there are 3 closed loops, so it should be a 3. Again, look outside the box every once in a while, you know what I mean?
That's actually looking inside the box. You can count how many loops there are.
Well, that's a hard one, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing that would lead you to go in that direction, basically. So you need maybe you saw 100 examples, you'd be able to figure it out. But that's kind of a pretty limited sample to pick up on that. All right. Well, congratulations. That's good. Now a more serious question. So if I'm trying to declare a generic box T, and I want to make a variable of that type, which way is a legal way to declare B, given that code? And I'm starting a question. Oh, I gave 30 seconds on, no, I gave 20 seconds on that. What am I, crazy? No, okay. So quick, look, type in an answer. Sorry, that's their default time, which is really short, and I meant to change it. All right, so about half the class got the correct answer, which is this one. So again, the form of putting in a generic is you have the class type, and then inside what's sometimes called the diamond or the angle brackets, you give an object type, and then you give the variable name. So what's wrong with this one here? Int is a primitive. You're not allowed to pass primitives to generic classes. Okay, so I always want to do this. Give me a box int, right? But you're not allowed to do it. If you wanted something similar, what would you put in there instead? Integer, the big capital I integer one, right? This one, I think this is sort of like pretending to go by example, right? Like put a string object in there rather than a type name. So just putting an object in doesn't tell you what it is. So that's not allowed. This one, close to that integer thing, but the brackets belong to box and not to the variable name. So again, you'll use this and you'll get used to it. Don't worry about it. But there are a couple things to keep in mind with all this. Make sure it's an object type and so on. So just get used to the syntax and it'll all be relatively easy. Okay. We'll remember our class communication. I think the main thing I want to say here really is look at the announcements. So I probably answered 50 emails about CPM or some variation of stuff I announced. And it's okay, I'm happy to try to help you, but it's to my benefit for you to read announcements, so I don't have to answer 50 emails, and it's actually to your benefit as well, so you get the information as timely as you can, right? So it's not just me being like, I hate answering emails. It's like, I want you to get that information when it can help you, not dependent on me late at night to reply, so just look at those announcements, right? You should, for all your classes, I imagine this is sort of important, so make sure your email somehow is getting to you from those announcements. Discussions are also useful, and again, I think people have been good about this, but read the discussion first, see if something's been already talked about, and then post there. And then again, if you need something specific, that help email list is, gets a lot of traffic as well, and we're happy to answer, but that's probably better for like real specific kind of code things. And then maybe the one other point on the help stuff is that, once you start getting help, don't get addicted to it, right? Still put the effort into problem solving on your own. We try to shut you down after a little while and say, hey, put some print statements in here, use the debugger. Don't just be like, thanks, that helped, now this is broken kind of thing, right? Which some people get in that sort of mindset a little bit. Anyway, lots of ways to stay in touch. And, thank you for coming to class as well. That's one way to stay in touch, right? Test B, last problem. Again, there's this problem grading. If you had test B, the last problem was graded versus the test A key. And you should get partial credit. You need to show me or TA the actual test, and then we can figure out what's going on with it, okay? And we'll update the score. But it's not an easy way to just sort of say, add points. You can't just send me an email. Give me 4 points, please,
If we're in that group, when can we expect to see the change in our grade?
I'm a little worried that the whole people that just collected names thing wasn't really the right mechanism. Like they didn't necessarily track the points you should get or something in some of those things. So if in lab, if you haven't seen anything now, you should basically need to re-hit us with a test. Okay, is my guess.
Are you good with just like a picture on an email?
It would have to be like almost a picture of a lot of the tests. Like I need to see the front page, the score sheet, and enough of the page to see if someone has been marked on it already, kind of stuff.
So is after spring break okay then?
Yeah, there's no time limit on this kind of thing. All right, so it's a little complicated, but we just need to work through it bit by bit. For the homework, again, so to other code, dynamic array and dynamic array 2 look exactly the same, right? They have the same interface. The same methods are associated with it. And again, the good thing about that is we could swap in dynamic array 2 for dynamic array, and this exercises these ideas of abstraction. In other words, you say add, there's a nice method name called add, and it does all that stuff. Do we need to double the size of the array? Do we need to update virtual something? It has a lot of things going on underneath, but all we have to care about is add a value to the array, right? That's abstraction. And that's a beautiful thing, right? We don't want to have to track all these little details. So someone can use dynamic array just very easily, add this value, remove this value, and it just works. It's great. And then this encapsulation idea where we're preventing other people from using the internals and messing it up is also in effect here. And again, that's how we managed to make 2 versions of this without sort of changing the outside interface. So I hope in some ways you gained some appreciation for this, and using it in string set maybe saw how you could build up complexity without getting overwhelmed by it. But when I'm talking about dynamic array, what is something I could have done when making those classes that would make this not work? So there's a lot of ways to do things wrong in object-oriented programming. And I'm curious if you have any ideas, like what would be some bad things. Bad ideas. Bad ideas for the dynamic array class. Let me tell you, I know there's some bad ideas because I was talking on a lot of emails with a lot of bad ideas. So I want to hear some, fess up here a little bit, right? Okay, so I could have made everything public. Why is that a bad idea? I mean, we live in a free and open society. Why not carry this over to this political philosophy to our coding as well, right? Like let the user be responsible for themselves.
Well, I think for the assignment instance, we're kind of creating 2 objects that are very similar. One is using the other one. So maybe in the, for whatever reason we call our dynamic array rather than our set, and then we try and change something, and if we don't have it locked down, then all of a sudden we can change our instance variable.
What's wrong with change? So the problem is you could change, what in particular would be a bad thing to change outside of the context of the dynamic array class?
The number of, the thing that tracks.
Well, almost change almost anything, right? Virtual array length. If that gets out of sync with the data thing, that's bad. If you change data, you basically have to change this at the same time, right? They're kind of two things going on at once, and you have to also have all those checks to make sure that you're not getting too big and you need to double down. And so letting people access to that without that extra context of like doubling down and changing virtual array length is super dangerous, right? Someone could add a value that they think is going to be stored at the end of this thing, and they could even update this, but anyway, that unfettered access just removes any guarantees you have that this class is going to work, basically. And so, given that access, people are going to start doing stuff to it. They're going to have this bright idea about what they want to do to this thing. Like all of a sudden, they might say, hey, there's like extra data spots here we're not using. I'm going to store some temporary variables there and kind of use it for something else, right? And that's going to be their cool idea. Like, I don't need to build this other thing. I'm going to sneak it in here. And then all of a sudden, the actual class goes and doubles down and erases all that stuff and it's gone, and everything, no one can understand what's going on. So it's just a bad idea to allow this. So making everything public in general is a bad idea. What else could you imagine that could kind of break things? What's another way of sort of doing stuff? Yeah.
Making the necessary static variables.
Well, okay, so like static things. Well, that's going to be dangerous just because if you make like data static, then there's only one copy per dynamic array. For 10 different dynamic array instances, there's only one data, right? And that's going to be a huge mess. But that's, even I want to. No one's done that to me yet, so I'm not going to, think of that. Yeah.
You basically already mentioned it, but allowing the setter to have access to the backing array instead of the usable array.
Yeah. So the other place, and this is sort of, pretty obvious, and I sort of just tell you pretty simple rules like don't make everything public, make it private. And all you have to do is make it private and then you won't have trouble. But there's other things you can do, like have getters and setters that give too much freedom. So you're saying, don't cut down the index to only be valid between 0 and virtual array length. Let them do some other stuff in there, right? And let them decide, and that's a problem. But I think even more so is this getter side. So what if I had a string array get data. So this is public get data, and this thing returned data. So we've talked about having getters before, right? And sometimes we want to get a name or get an ID or something. And so some people just start making getters for everything. And in fact, there are development environments that just say, Eclipse included, that say, make me a getter for all my instance variables. And it's very easy to check that box, and it dumps out all this cool code, and your class is like 2/3 done, and you feel good about it. But here, I'm making a getter for data, which is one of our instance variables. And it seems like a cool thing, right? Why not provide access to it? What's wrong with this then?
It equates to the same array, so you don't mess up the instance value.
This basically returns that whole array, and you could do things to it. And it's almost the same as making it public, right? I'm exposing it through a getter here, and people can do unfettered things to it, and we already know we shouldn't be changing data without changing the virtual array length and all those kind of things. And so don't just blindly add hooks into a class that just because you start seeing these patterns, like this is a setter and a getter. Think about why you want it, and people should be allowed to do that, okay? So this is where eventually, the more experience you have making classes, you start to realize, like, you should have a purpose to these things, and they should do things that people want to do to them, but you shouldn't let them do just whatever they want, basically. So just keep that in mind as you start seeing more classes, that there's a real skill here and a real sort of aesthetic sense about what should be part of your methods of your class. All right, so questions on that? Kind of get that idea? Don't just make things without thinking about it. All right. Now, in this time, a lot of people really resisted using this nice dynamic array 2 class that you had built in the string set class. And I understand why you resisted, right? But in my mind, string set needs to add values to it, store values inside it. We don't want a fixed sized array, we want a variable sized array. How do we get that functionality in there? A lot of people started redoing all the code like they say, oh, I want a data array and I want to double it, so I need a virtual array length and blah, 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 and sort of copying all that code over there. And that's understandable because that's what you knew how to do, right? You're like, I just wrote this class, I know how to make a variable size array. But instead, why not think I have this beautiful class, it's like rock solid, it works, it stores things for me, and let's use that in the string set instead of an actual fixed sized array, right? So you have to get used to this idea, again, of building on existing work, building up complexity, and taking advantage of things you've already done. So this is something, again, you'll, as we get more and more code going, you'll do this more and more, but this is a super common way to do stuff, right? Get something solved, and then take a chunk of that and put it in something else and make something even more complicated with it. Questions about that? Still lingering from the assignment, or you're all sort of happy now that you sort of actually were forced to do it? Not so happy. All right. We'll see. I think there's still a fair number of people that are kind of tentative about some of the terminology of the object-oriented program we're doing. So let's ask a quick question. Which of these things is what we call an instance variable? And here's Kahoot. Kahoot's still alive here. I'll give a full minute on this one. No panic. Study your options. Still 30. Why I gave 20 seconds for that one question and a minute for this one. It's hard to understand. Seconds. Put it in. I like the little burst of numbers. All right, so almost all of you got it right, but let's just talk about it briefly. What is T here in this case? It's like the generic type, right? So it defines what, this is like a class variable that holds the type that the form will eventually have. When you see these variables hanging out alone in the class, right, those are the instance variables. And when they're not static, there's one copy of each one of these per instance of the class. And it's basically what the object knows about, right, the kind of stuff it stores internally. What would you call this thing here?
Parameter.
It's parameter. It's parameter of the constructor, right? So if you're building an object, you're going to pass a value in, an argument to the constructor, and parameter holds that value in the constructor. And what's this thing here? A name, yes. What do we call it? A local variable, yeah. So right, and it only has scope in the constructor here. All right, so that's good. Seems like most of you are the right idea here. Okay, so in terms of that, all right. If we have an animal of some kind, we could say like a cat is an animal, and it's not like a cat has an animal, right? A cat is an animal. So there's in our normal